Alright, good morning. It is Thursday, January 9th, 2025. I'm Anthony. This is Drive Dive. I'm going to categorize this one as Adventures in Parenting. Just going to talk a little bit about what this is sort of motivated by and some different stories, how I've maybe reinforced or attempted to correct certain behaviors in my children. So I was in a workshop yesterday, sort of an induction process in my district where periodically we meet and there are different presenters, different topics. And so yesterday's was about student behavior and it reminded me of my psychology course from my undergraduate studies, where we spoke about reinforcing behavior, and I forget the other term, but maybe correcting or something behavior. But the idea that if I want a behavior to continue, I can either introduce a positive reward, or so that would be positive reinforcement. Give a kid a sticker, give a kid a high five, right? Something to that effect, some sort of prize, again a reward that is being introduced. You can also do what's called negative reinforcement, which is where we then take something away that ends up serving as a reward. So I'm thinking I could take away an earlier bedtime, right? Making that bedtime later, lifting a restriction would be sort of a negative reinforcement of that positive behavior. One of the examples shared yesterday, again, we're educators, was to remove a homework assignment. I could shorten the homework or remove it altogether should a group of students, class, do well enough during the class period to say, you know what, your behavior was so excellent today, here's your reward, we're going to remove this homework assignment. And then on the other end of things, trying to curtail certain behaviors, there is the idea of the positive correction, where we impose a penalty, where we introduce to the scenario some sort of element that serves as a punishment. And then I guess negative reinforcement would be to take something away. So maybe taking away a particular privilege that they do have. So just thinking off the top of my head, student behaviors, to introduce something, maybe I'm issuing them a detention, maybe I'm emailing home, contacting their coach, so that there's some sort of penalty ultimately that gets imposed. To take something away, I might, remove a privilege and start scaling back on, you no longer get to choose where you sit. That was a choice that you had. There was a privilege that you had. I now am taking that away from you. Something to that effect. I forget the examples that were shared yesterday, but again, this idea of just different ways of promoting certain behaviors so that they continue or reoccur, and then trying to prevent or correct certain behaviors so that they don't happen in the future or don't happen as often. And I don't know, one of the examples that was discussed, it's why made me think about my children. There was an example shared about, if you picture a parent and a child in in a grocery store or supermarket, the child sees candy, asks for candy, the parent says no, the child starts crying. The parent eventually gives in and purchases that snack, that candy bar, whatever it is, for the child. That's the scenario. And I guess the child crying, once they get the candy bar, for them, that's very rewarding. This is positioned as being very rewarding for the child. That behavior of crying out, lashing out in response to their request being rejected and denied. They cried, that was their behavior. They received this reward, which is ultimately positive reinforcement. And now perhaps that child is learning to, well, the next time I do want this candy bar in the supermarket, I'm going to attempt to cry again in order to get what I want. On the parent end, it was likewise a painful experience, or certainly a negative one, with the child crying. And I've been there, right? This moment of panic, like, oh, this is embarrassing, or, I wish my child wouldn't act this way. But my behavior then, or the parent's behavior then in this scenario, giving the child the candy bar, removed that sort of penalty or that negative aspect of the situation. My child stopped crying, right? That's being removed, which then reinforces, I guess, my behavior, right? It was that crying being removed from the situation. That's my positive. That's my reward. That is the reinforcement, but it's a negative reinforcement, because that crying that negative stimulus was actually removed. So I'm thinking of certain times in which I don't even want to say guilty, because I don't know which side of the fence of this sort of stuff I'm really on, where I can't help it, right? I mean, there's a lot of psychology here from the time when I was a child and interactions with my parents that certainly have a bearing on how I interact with and raise my children. When they're crying, I can't help but try to help them. I mean, the whole candy bar, this or that, is sort of a different story, but sometimes I think, really, what's the big deal? Especially when I'm talking about my younger children, right? They're different. My children when they were younger, right? I mean, they're obviously different ages now. Or my son is 8, and I feel like I can have these conversations with him. We can have more of a no, you can't have the candy bar. Well, why can't I have the candy bar? And have this exchange, and even to the point where we talk about, at times, very, very mature, I think, the cost of the candy bar, and whether or not it makes sense financially to purchase one at this particular store, like at an AutoZone where they have candy, but it's certainly pricier than it would be at, say, a ShopRite. And having some of those conversations, I might say yes if it were better priced, but right now it's just a little too pricey, so that's why I'm saying no. Yes, of course, we then at times have these conversations about our health and whether or not we should be consuming candy, etc. But when they're younger, my daughter's 2, and just doesn't have the ability yet with her speech to have these conversations. She does comprehend words like later or tomorrow, and we're working on things like, after dinner, where we're saying these things and she's comprehending them. But I'm just thinking that in the moment they're expressing a need, and I think my bigger concern or fear, right, it's less about the candy and the specific need, and more in my mind, what is the child learning in terms of how I, as the father, am responding to their needs. And I mentioned that there's some psychology here where I think for me as a child, I often felt as though my parents were not responding to my needs. And I ended up, yes, I think there's positive where I then learned to fend for myself and I guess be more independent and figure out how to get things done for myself. There's also been some negative aspects to that, right? You might say, oh yeah, independence, that's great. But then I've also, even as an adult now, I think I then have a tendency to not ask for help, to put that response to my needs that or lack thereof that I experienced at times, I put that on other people and expect unfairly, unverifiably, unjustifiably, just unsupported, right? I put this on other people and I assume that maybe they won't respond to my needs similarly, and I'm just going to do what I need to get the job, the task completed by myself. So some good and some bad to the lack of attention to my needs that I experienced as a child. And so now on the flip side, as a parent, I'm just thinking that, well, if it is a need that my children are able to communicate to me in some form, whether it's verbally and articulately, as I described my older son, my 8-year-old son, being able to do, or my daughter, who maybe can't use as many words just yet, but she may cry to communicate that there is a need, there is something off, and I just feel that I need to respond to it as best I can. If it's a candy bar, so what, right? I don't have those types of feelings, about the candy in the moment, and they're just going to learn to cry and get their way, and that may be true, but then I think there's more of a relationship building that is occurring as well, and the child understanding, in general, are my needs being tended to, not being tended to, and then there can be this maturation process of, these are now the types of needs that my caregiver will tend to, and these are the ones that they won't, and try to maybe differentiate that way. And so another example, and maybe a fun one, when my son was, I think, around the age of 3, right? This was certainly during COVID, I believe, when we were home, and my son asked me to make him iced tea. And I just remember asking him, all right, well, how do we make iced tea? I think I went to get we probably had a powder or something in the cabinet. I go to get it, and he's telling me no, that's not how you make iced tea. And I'm dumbfounded, and I'm being told by a 3-year-old how not to make iced tea, and so I said, well, how do you make iced tea? You'll never believe this unless I tell you. And he says ketchup and water. Ketchup and water? No, that's not how you make iced tea. And he insists, and he's crying about it. He's yelling at me, and I'm sure trying to get some other things done, work related and all, and I'm getting upset, and I'm like, this is like unbelievable, unreal, and but have at least have my wits about me a little bit enough to go, listen, this is not something that I'm going to kick and scream about with him, right? I'm gonna give in, and he's upset. He's communicated this need. He wants iced tea. He believes there's a way to accomplish this and meet his need. I say, okay, man, we'll do it your way. So we get a cup out, start filling it with water. I say, you let me know how much. You let me know when we have enough water in the cup. Okay, great. That's good. Okay, let's get the ketchup. You let me know. I'll start squeezing. You let me know once there's enough ketchup in this cup. And that's what we did. I gave it to him, shook it up. Here you go. Here's your iced tea, sir. And he needed to experience this, and it was an experience where he knew right away that ooh, we made a mistake here. This is not iced tea. And so it's so funny to me where we could talk about that in terms of this positive, negative reinforcement, positive, negative correction, etc., and analyze the situation there. But they presented two different theories. One was this SDT, which is where SDT theory, I don't even remember what it's about, but that's this positive, negative reinforcement of behavior, positive, negative correction of behavior. And there was another theory posited, and so for me, maybe it's one of those two theories. Again, I'm leaving out the name of the second one, or maybe it's some alternate theory. I don't know, but right, we could look at that situation and say, well, ultimately he cried about it, insisted that he knew how to make iced tea, and I gave in. I reinforced this behavior. Me giving in and quieting him down. Right, the fact that he quieted down reinforced my behavior of giving in to. I can't with that. I can't put that on that moment and on my relationship with my child. I prefer to think that this was a time where he wanted to take a risk. He wanted to. And maybe he didn't know it was a risk, right? For him, it was a certainty that this was how you make iced tea. I know it's wrong, but there's this learning opportunity. There is this opportunity to take a risk and learn from the failure. Even though I already know the outcome, I recognize that he can take this risk and learn from it with very little to no harm. And so my thinking is, maybe overthinking it, who knows? But as I remind him of this story every so often, I think there's an element of not only me responding to his needs, but then there's an element of building trust. And if there's this moment where together we discovered that not he was wrong and I was right, but we did have this conversation, right? We have this goal. We want iced tea. We had this conversation, this exchange of, well, here's how I think we should approach it, and here's how you think we should approach it, and which is the better one. And maybe he learned in that moment he doesn't always have the answers, and maybe he learned in that moment that there is someone in his life who he could consult, someone who will be there for him, someone who will support him in his decision-making process and offer their opinion and offer their thoughts on whether it's right and wrong, what they might do differently. But ultimately, hey, all right, the choice is yours, man. But I'll be there to help you through that experience, and then I'll be there with you to help you correct it in the end. So I do think that there's more to it than just right and wrong and positive and negative and reinforcing. I mean, there's just so much to take into account. And there was some discussion of that a little bit, and classifying disorders and whatnot as part of this presentation, taking into account the age of the child and so on. But I'm just thinking it's all so complex, and I think I see that too, in the classroom a lot, where you have some behaviors that you have to let the child fail in a way, and okay, like we can do it your way, and I will support you, but I will, should you fail doing it your way, I'll be there with you to help you figure out another. And so I don't know, I think that's what I wanted to try to talk about and share with you about some of this stuff with parenting, also connected to the classroom, and but that was the whole thing: positive, negative, behavior reinforcement and correction, and what that's meant for me, and how I think I approach my relationship building, certainly with my kids, but take my own children, but take a similar approach, I think, to doing the same with my students in the classroom, helping them try to understand their decisions and ultimately support them. So anyway, that's it. Thanks for watching. Happy Thursday. Any comments, thoughts, please share below. Give us a like, subscribe to the channel. A bunch of videos up here already. These I put on different playlists. Drive Dive, I will likely file this one, like I said, under Adventures in Parenting. And any other topics I touch upon, I put them on different playlists. Whether it's parenting, I think I labeled it mathematics education, and certainly Drive Dive. But anyway, thanks for watching. Catch you on the next one.